The first explosion came with the sunrise. For a moment no one moved, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then the sky cracked open, and everything that once felt ordinary, the wind, the noise of the market, the laughter of a child, vanished into chaos. Clara stood on her balcony, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, when the glass trembled. The cup slipped and shattered. Her first thought wasn't fear, it was Miguel. He was on the other side of the city, a doctor always on call, always saving lives. She imagined him now, somewhere in the middle of the confusion, his calm eyes scanning the room, his voice steady even as the world began to burn. Smoke rose from the east, thick and black. Sirens wailed, and in the distance the church bells kept ringing, like a warning that came too late. She ran inside, grabbing her coat, her breath uneven. The city was no longer a place, it was a heartbeat, and every beat whispered the same name, Miguel. Miguel was inside the hospital when the power went out. 3 short flickers, and then darkness. He could still hear the machines, the breathing tubes, the monitors, but one by one they began to fail. He shouted for help, for flashlights, for someone to restart the backup generators, but the tremors kept coming. The building groaned under the weight of the blasts. Through the chaos, through the dust, one thought stayed in his mind. Clara. Her laughter, the softness in her voice when she said goodbye that morning. She had promised to cook dinner. He had promised to come home early. Now, all promises felt like lies whispered to the wind. Night fell fast. Or maybe it was the smoke that darkened the sky. Clara walked through the broken streets, her face hidden under a scarf. Every few steps a new sound, glass, metal, gunfire, but she didn't stop. At every checkpoint soldiers shouted for people to go home. At every intersection someone whispered that the east side was gone. Still she kept walking. Because love, she thought, doesn't obey curfews. Love doesn't listen to warnings. Love walks straight into the fire. Inside the ruins of the hospital, Miguel moved among the wounded. He was exhausted, his hands shaking, his body covered in dust. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw her, waiting, smiling, alive. He needed to believe she was alive. In a dark hallway, he found a small underground shelter. They called it the pit. There were 20 people inside, mothers, children, nurses. He stayed with them, working through the night, stitching wounds by the light of a single candle. When the candle flickered and died, silence filled the room. And then, faint, almost unreal, he heard it. His name. Miguel. It came from above, muffled through the concrete and smoke. He froze. Then he ran. But the stairwell was half collapsed. He climbed through debris, pushing away chunks of brick and steel, until he reached what was left of the hospital's front entrance. And there she was, Clara, her face streaked with ash, eyes wide, hands trembling. When she saw him, she stumbled forward, half crying, half laughing. He caught her before she fell. For a long moment neither of them spoke, their foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling with dust and tears. "You shouldn't have come," he whispered. She smiled through her tears. "You really thought I'd stay away?" He wanted to scold her, to tell her she had risked too much, but instead he just held her tighter, because in that instant, with the world collapsing around them, love was the only thing that made sense. Dawn arrived slowly, painting the smoke with shades of gold and sorrow. They sat on the rubble, their hands intertwined, watching what was left of the city. Clara rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you think this will ever end?" she asked softly. Miguel's eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. "Everything ends someday," he said. Then he looked at her and smiled faintly. "But not love, not this." The next morning brought a fragile kind of quiet, the kind that comes after storms, when even the birds are too afraid to sing. Clara and Miguel joined a group of survivors near the old railway station. People gathered in silence, holding photographs, shouting names that vanished in the wind. The government had declared the city a red zone. No communication, no help, just ruins and hope, side by side. Miguel worked tirelessly, patching wounds with torn shirts, using rainwater to clean the blood from his hands. Clara helped him however she could, passing supplies, calming children, whispering prayers she no longer believed in. Every time he looked at her, something inside him softened. Even in dirt and smoke she carried light. And that night, they sat by the remains of an old truck, sharing the last of a canned soup. The stars were hidden, but the moon still managed to shine through the smoke. "Remember the beach?" she asked suddenly. He smiled. "The one we never went to?" She nodded, laughing softly. "You promised me a trip after your next night shift." He reached out, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "I'm still promising. Then promise me again," she whispered. He did, not with words, but with a kiss that tasted of ash and eternity. The days turned into weeks. The war didn't end, but somehow they found a rhythm. Between ruins and rescue missions, they built a small shelter near the river, using broken wood, metal sheets, and an old mattress they found in a destroyed building. At night, they would sit by the riverbank talking in whispers, as if their voices could wake the sleeping chaos. Sometimes she would hum, soft melodies that Miguel remembered from before. Sometimes he would close his eyes and imagine that the sound of distant bombs was just thunder, that the world beyond the city still existed. And sometimes, in the stillness between explosions, they would just hold hands and breathe together, as if the simple act of breathing was enough to defy destruction. But one morning, the silence broke again. Planes roared overhead. The ground shook. A second wave of attacks. The east side again. Miguel grabbed Clara's hand. "We have to go, now." They ran through the alleyways, past shattered windows and fallen signs. Smoke thickened the air, making it hard to see, hard to breathe. Behind them, the world burned. In front of them, the bridge. The old metal bridge that led to the western outskirts, where the resistance was rumored to be forming safe zones. They reached it just as another explosion thundered. The bridge shuddered, half of it collapsing into the river below. Miguel turned to Clara. "Go first." "No, Clara, go." She ran. The metal beneath her feet screamed, bending under the heat. Miguel followed, the distance between them swallowed by smoke. Halfway across, the bridge gave way completely. The world tilted. He grabbed the railing with one hand and her wrist with the other. "Don't let go," she cried. "I won't." But his arm was bleeding. His grip was slipping. "Clara," he said, his voice breaking. "If I fall—" "You won't," she screamed. "You promised." And somehow he didn't. A soldier appeared from the far side, shouting orders, pulling them both to safety. They collapsed on the ground, coughing, trembling, covered in dust. Alive, barely. Clara pressed her forehead to his. "See?" she whispered. "You keep your promises." Miguel smiled weakly. "I told you. Not even the world falling apart can stop us." Morning came grey and trembling. The city was quieter now, as if even the air was afraid to move. Smoke drifted across the horizon, soft and heavy, turning the light into a blur of gold and ash. Clara woke first. She sat beside the broken bridge, watching the river crawl beneath the ruins. Miguel still slept beside her, one hand wrapped loosely around hers. His breathing was uneven, but steady enough to calm her trembling heart. She studied his face, streaked with dirt, small cuts along his jaw, hair matted from sweat and dust. Yet she thought he had never looked more alive. Every scar, every bruise felt like proof that he was still hers, that somehow against the odds love had survived the night. When he stirred, she smiled. "Good morning," she whispered. Miguel blinked, his voice rough. "Is it?" She nodded toward the faint sunrise. "We're still here, that's something." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe that's what hope looks like, the moment you realize you're still breathing." They followed the road west, walking for hours. The once busy streets had turned into a graveyard of silence. Cars burned out and overturned, doors hanging open, letters scattered like leaves. They stopped near a small bakery that still smelled faintly of flour and smoke. Inside, Clara found a half-burned notebook, its pages filled with sketches, smiling faces, children's drawings, dreams of better days. She pressed it to her chest as if it was sacred. Miguel didn't ask why. He knew what she was doing, ungathering fragments of a world that no longer existed. By afternoon, they reached what remained of the West District, an old factory converted into a refuge. Inside, people huddled around makeshift fires. A man handed them bread. A woman offered water. Someone recognized Miguel from the hospital. "Doctor!" they called. And just like that, he was needed again. He hesitated only long enough to look at Clara. She nodded, already understanding. "Go. Help them. That's who you are." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Don't disappear." Days blurred together. Miguel treated wounds, set broken bones, taught others how to sterilize instruments with boiling water. Clara helped in the kitchen, writing down names of survivors, comforting children who woke screaming at night. Sometimes when the chaos quieted, they'd steal a few minutes alone. Under the half-broken roof, they'd talk about anything but war, about the sea they'd never seen, the songs they wanted to hear again, the dream of planting flowers on their balcony when this was all over. "Do you really think there will be an after?" she asked one night. Miguel looked up at the stars, faint, almost invisible through the smoke. "There has to be," he said softly. "Otherwise, why fight so hard to stay alive?" Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. Maybe that was what hope truly was. Not certainty, but the stubborn refusal to let despair win. One morning, a child ran into the shelter shouting, "They're coming!" Gunfire followed. The soldiers had reached the West District. Panic spread like wildfire. Miguel grabbed Clara's hand. "We need to hide." They ducked into a storage room behind the infirmary, holding their breath as boots thundered outside. Shouts echoed through the halls. A baby cried. Someone screamed. Clara's fingers tightened around his. "I'm scared," she whispered. "I know," he said, his voice trembling for the first time. "But I'm here. Always." The door rattled. Miguel pressed her against the wall, covering her with his body as shadows passed by. For a moment, everything stopped. No sound, no air, just the rhythm of two hearts refusing to surrender. Then the footsteps faded. The danger passed. Clara exhaled, tears slipping down her cheeks. "We can't stay here forever," she said. Miguel nodded slowly. "Then we don't. We keep moving. Together." They followed the river for days. It wound like a silver scar through the valley, carrying ashes, memories, and the reflection of a world on fire. At night, they built small fires with scraps of wood. Miguel would sit quietly, his hands still trembling from the surgeries he'd done during the day. Clara would lean against him, tracing circles on his wrist where his pulse beat faintly, the rhythm that reminded her he was still here. They didn't speak much anymore. Words felt too fragile, too small for the weight of everything they carried. On the fifth night, the wind shifted. It carried laughter, soft, human, alive. They followed the sound to a hidden camp in the woods. Dozens of refugees sat around bonfires, singing in low voices, sharing what little food they had. A woman with grey hair welcomed them. "You're safe here," she said. "For now." It was the first time in weeks that Clara allowed herself to rest without fear. She closed her eyes and listened, to the river, the murmurs, the heartbeat beside her, and for a moment the world didn't feel broken. First Kanaham days turned into a strange peace. Miguel helped treat the sick in the camp. Clara taught the children how to read, using torn pages from abandoned books. One night, she caught Miguel watching her from across the fire. The way he looked at her, quiet, full of ache and wonder, made her heart flutter despite the chaos around them. "What?" she laughed. "Nothing," he said softly. "I just keep thinking how, somehow, you still make this world look beautiful." She smiled, pretending to scold him. "Flattery won't get you extra soup, doctor." But his eyes didn't waver. He wasn't joking. Later that night, under the faint glow of the moon, they walked down to the riverbank. The water shimmered, reflecting firelight and stars. Miguel picked up a small, flat stone and threw it. It skipped twice before sinking. "Do you ever think about before?" he asked. Clara nodded. "Every day." "What do you miss most?" She took a moment before answering. The sound of rain on the window, the smell of coffee, the feeling of safety. He looked down at her. "And me?" She smiled softly. "You? I never lost you." But safety was fleeting. At dawn, the sound of distant engines rolled through the forest. Planes again. Bombs again. The camp scattered in chaos. Miguel grabbed the medical bag. Clara ran after the children. Explosions tore through the trees, turning night into fire. The river boiled with smoke and debris. Miguel shouted her name, but she was already running toward the flames, toward the children trapped near the tents. He followed, heart pounding. When he reached her, she was pulling a boy from under a fallen branch. "Clara, we have to go!" "Not without them!" she cried. Another explosion roared nearby, knocking them both to the ground. Miguel shielded her with his body as dirt and fire rained down. When the dust cleared, the camp was gone. Nothing left but smoke and silence. They found refuge in a small cave near the river, both coughing, shaking, covered in ash. Miguel held her face in his hands. "You could have died. So could you," she whispered. "I'd rather die with you than live without you." Her breath caught. "Don't say that. I mean it." Clara pressed her lips to his, fierce and desperate. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was survival, it was defiance, it was everything they had left. When they finally pulled apart, tears streaked her dirty cheeks. "I don't want to lose you, Miguel." He rested his forehead against hers. "Then don't. Hold on to me no matter what happens." Outside, the river kept flowing, carrying ash, memories, and a single fragile truth. Even when the world burns, love still moves like water, endlessly, quietly, unstoppable. Days passed like fragments of broken glass, sharp, fragile, impossible to hold. Clara and Miguel stayed near the river, surviving on what they could find: wild berries, rainwater, and the quiet strength they gave each other. At night they shared stories, not about the war but about the world before it. The time he fixed her broken watch, the afternoon she fell asleep reading on his lap, the scent of lilacs outside their apartment window. Every memory felt like a heartbeat, echoing from another life. And in that echo they found something that looked like hope. One evening, as the last light faded, Clara noticed Miguel's hands shaking again. He tried to hide it, but she saw the way his fingers trembled when he reached for the water bottle. "Miguel, you're hurt." "It's nothing," he said. But when she took his hand, she saw the wound, deep, angry, and infected, a cut from the explosion days before. "Miguel," her voice broke, "you need antibiotics, you need real medicine." He smiled faintly. "We used it all on the children." Clara felt tears rising. "You can't keep saving everyone and killing yourself in the process." He cupped her face with his good hand, thumb brushing her cheek. "If I stop helping, I stop being me, and then what's left for you to love?" She shook her head, crying. "Don't say that. Don't ever say that again." He leaned forward and kissed her. Slow, soft, tasting of rain and sorrow. "I'll be fine," he whispered. "I promise." The next morning, Clara woke to find him gone. Panic surged through her chest. She ran along the river calling his name until her throat burned. Finally, she saw him near the edge of the forest, kneeling beside a group of refugees, wrapping bandages with trembling hands. When he turned, his smile was weak but real. "I told you I couldn't stay still." She wanted to be angry, but instead she laughed, a broken, beautiful laugh that carried through the ruins like sunlight through smoke. Because in a world full of endings, laughter still meant life. Fascinant that night. The stars returned for the first time in months. The smoke had lifted, just enough to reveal the sky, vast, endless, untouched. Clara lay beside him, her fingers tracing constellations. "Do you think they look different now?" she asked. Miguel turned his head toward her. "No, I think they look the same. We're the ones who changed." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's good. Maybe." He watched her eyes reflect the stars, and in that reflection he saw their future. Fragile, uncertain, but real. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "we'll cross the mountains. I heard there's a safe zone on the other side." Clara nodded, closing her eyes. Tomorrow. But deep down they both knew. Tomorrow had become a dangerous word. The morning came with thunder, not from storms, but from artillery in the distance. The world was still burning. They packed what little they had and began walking toward the mountains. The sky grew darker with every step, clouds rolling like smoke. The road was endless. Bodies of cars, empty houses, broken signs pointing nowhere. Clara walked beside Miguel, glancing at him every few minutes. His face was pale, sweat dripping down his neck. The infection was worse. "You need to rest," she said. He shook his head. "If I stop now, I might not start again." She tightened her grip on his hand. "Then I'll make sure you do." By dusk, rain began to fall, heavy, relentless, washing the blood and dust from the earth. They found shelter in the remains of an old church at the foot of the mountain. The roof was half gone, but the altar still stood. Candles lay scattered across the floor, melted into twisted shapes. Clara lit one with a match she'd kept hidden in her pocket. The flame flickered weakly, fighting against the wind. She sat beside Miguel, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead. His eyes fluttered open. "Looks like we found heaven," he murmured, voice faint. She laughed softly, though her heart was breaking. "If this is heaven, it needs cleaning." He smiled. "You'd still make it beautiful." The night stretched endlessly. Outside, the rain fell like memory. Inside, the candlelight painted their faces in gold and shadow. Clara rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, slower now but still steady. "Do you remember what you told me once?" she whispered. "That love isn't about how long it lasts, but how deeply it's felt." He nodded weakly. "I never understood it. Until now." Miguel opened his eyes, searching her face. "Clara, if I—" She pressed a finger to his lips. "No, don't you dare say goodbye." He fell silent, tears glistening in his eyes. The candle burned lower. Outside, the wind howled through the broken windows, carrying the echo of distant sirens. Clara held him tighter. "Sleep," she whispered. "Just rest. I'll be here when you wake." He closed his eyes, breathing unevenly, his hand still gripping hers. Sometime before dawn, the rain stopped. The silence that followed was almost holy. Clara looked at his face in the pale morning light. He was alive, weak, but alive. Relief flooded her chest like sunlight. She leaned forward and kissed his forehead. Then she stood, walking toward the altar. On the cracked marble, she placed the melted candle stub and whispered a single prayer. "Don't take him from me. Not yet." When she turned back, the first rays of dawn were breaking through the shattered roof, spilling light across the floor, across his face, across the ruins. It was the longest night they'd ever survived. And for the first time, morning didn't feel like a lie. The mountains rose like ghosts against the horizon, pale and vast, dusted with snow that glowed faintly under the morning sun. Clara tightened her scarf around her neck and glanced back at the church. The candle she had left on the altar still burned, a tiny flame fighting the wind. She took that as a sign. They were meant to keep moving. Miguel leaned on her shoulder as they climbed the first slope. His strength had returned just enough for walking, but every few steps his breath caught, and Clara felt the tremor run through him. She said nothing, just steadied him with her hand and kept her eyes on the trail ahead. Above them, the sky opened wide and blue, so different from the smoke-filled air of the city. For the first time in months, the light felt clean. By midday, they reached an abandoned lookout tower. Inside, they found a rusted stove, a tin of powdered milk and a blanket that smelled of pine. Miguel sank to the floor, exhaustion hollowing his face. Clara knelt beside him, mixing the milk with melted snow and pressing the cup into his hands. "Drink," she said. He did, grimacing at the taste. "It's terrible." "It's life," she answered, smiling. He chuckled weakly. "You always make survival sound poetic." "That's because I'm trying to convince myself it is." Typhon Mamponatiwas. When night fell, the wind roared through the tower, shaking the windows in their frames. They huddled together beneath the blanket, listening to the storm build outside. Miguel whispered, "Do you ever wonder what's left out there? Maybe other cities survived." Clara traced her finger along his palm. Maybe. Maybe people are rebuilding somewhere, planting seeds again. He turned his hand and caught her fingers. "Then we'll find them." She wanted to believe him, but she had learned that hope was not a loud thing. It was quiet, stubborn, hidden deep in the chest, something that refused to die even when the world demanded it. At dawn, they started down the other side of the mountain. A valley opened below, green fields scattered with tents, the faint glimmer of smoke rising from controlled fires. A settlement. Clara's heart leapt. "Do you see that?" Miguel nodded, his eyes wide. "It's real." They almost ran the last mile, stumbling through snowmelt and mud, until a group of guards appeared from the trees. "Who are you?" one demanded. "Travelers," Clara said, "from Santa Lucia. We need shelter." The guard studied them, then signaled to open the gate. "Welcome to the northern haven," he said. "You're safe here." Inside the camp, order replaced chaos. Children chased each other between tents. People cooked over fires that smelled of beans and herbs. It felt like another world, one built from patience and loss. A medic took Miguel to a small infirmary. Clara followed, unwilling to let go of his hand even for a moment. The nurse smiled kindly. He'll need rest, but he's strong. You both are." For the first time, Clara allowed herself to breathe without fear. That evening, they walked through the camp together. Someone played a guitar near the central fire. The sound was soft, familiar, the kind of melody that carried memories instead of words. Miguel stopped and looked at her. "It feels strange, doesn't it? To be safe." She nodded. "I'd forgotten what safety sounded like." He laughed quietly. "It sounds like music out of tune," and Hope slightly off-key. They stood there side by side as the sky above them deepened to violet. For the first time since the war began, the stars shone clearly. Clara tilted her head back, watching them. "Beneath the same sky," she whispered. "No matter where we end up, we'll always be beneath the same sky." Miguel slipped his arm around her shoulders. "That's a promise I can keep." The days in Northern Haven settled into a fragile rhythm. Every morning the sun rose over the valley and painted the tents gold. People lined up for rations, children carried water, and for a little while it almost felt like peace. Clara helped in the communal kitchen, slicing vegetables, stirring pots of thin soup, listening to the sound of normal life trying to return. Miguel spent his days in the infirmary, his wound slowly healing, though the limp remained. Every evening when the work was done, they would meet by the river at the edge of camp, the same river that had followed them through every loss and miracle. It became their place, their proof that love could survive anything. Fürsti Seegaffer, one evening, as the sun dipped low, Miguel brought something hidden beneath his coat. When he sat beside her, he opened his hand to reveal a small silver ring, bent, tarnished, but unmistakably a wedding band. "Where did you find that?" Clara breathed. He smiled. "In the rubble of the church. I thought maybe it was waiting for us." She took it in her fingers, turning it over, the metal cold against her skin. "It's beautiful." Miguel's voice was quiet but steady. "Clara, we've lost almost everything, but I can't keep living as if the world already ended. I need to believe in something that lasts." Her eyes met his. "What are you saying?" He took her hand. "I'm saying I want to marry you. Here, now. No church, no vows written in books. Just you, me, and this ring that survived everything else." Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "Then let it be here. Let this broken world be our witness." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It didn't fit perfectly, but nothing perfect ever survived this long. And they kissed under a sky streaked with crimson and smoke. The wind carried the scent of pine and wood fire, and for one infinite heartbeat, time stopped. When they finally pulled apart, Clara whispered, "Promise me something. Anything. If we ever get separated again, you'll look for the river. No matter where you are, no matter what happens, meet me by the water." Miguel nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. "I promise. Always by the river." For the next morning, the peace shattered. A scout rode into the camp shouting warnings. Enemy forces had been spotted moving north. Panic swept through the tents. People packed whatever they could carry, preparing to flee again. Miguel gathered medical supplies, while Clara helped the children into wagons. "Where will we go?" someone asked. "Higher ground," the captain said, "into the mountains." The exodus began before dawn. Dozens of people trudged up the valley road, silhouettes against the rising sun. Miguel walked beside Clara, his hand gripping hers tightly. But halfway through the journey, the first shells hit. The sky erupted in fire. Screams echoed through the hills. Miguel turned to her. "Run!" She shook her head. "Not without you." He pushed her toward the trees. "Go, I'll catch up. Promise." He met her eyes, and even through the smoke his gaze was steady. "By the river," he said. "Always." Then another explosion tore the ground between them. Clara fell backward, coughing, blinded by dust. When the smoke cleared, he was gone. The world blurred. She screamed his name until her voice broke, but only the wind answered. The soldiers pulled her into the trees as the valley burned behind them. By nightfall they reached a cave high in the cliffs. Clara sat by the entrance, the ring heavy on her finger. Her heart, heaviest the days that followed, blurred into a haze of rain and silence. Clara stayed with the survivors in the mountain cave, her mind always half turned toward the valley below. Each morning she woke expecting to hear Miguel's voice, a laugh, a footstep, anything. But the only sound was the river far away, whispering against the rocks. She refused to believe he was gone. Every evening she stood outside the cave, scanning the horizon, whispering to the wind, "Find him, bring him back." The others pitied her, she could tell. They saw the way she clutched the ring, the way she kept a small pack ready, as if at any moment she might run back into the war. But she didn't care. Hope, she thought, was the one rebellion she still had left. Weeks passed before she heard the rumor. A small group of wounded men had been rescued by a river crossing to the west. Among them, a doctor, a man with dark hair and a limp. Clara didn't wait for confirmation. At dawn, she set off down the trail alone, the cold biting through her coat, her boots slipping on mud. The wind howled through the pines, but she kept moving, guided by the distant roar of water. By nightfall, she reached the valley floor. Smoke still lingered from the last attack, and the river shimmered faintly in the moonlight, the same river that had carried their promises. She followed its edge for hours. Every bend, every ripple, every glint of reflected starlight felt like a heartbeat calling her name, and then a sound, soft, broken, human. She turned. There, slumped against a fallen tree, lay Miguel. He was thinner, paler, but unmistakably him. When he saw her, his eyes widened, as if he were seeing sunlight for the first time. "Clara." She dropped to her knees beside him, laughing and crying all at once. "You kept your promise," she whispered. "I told you," he said weakly. "By the river." She pressed her forehead against his, tears mixing with the dirt on his face. "I thought I'd lost you." "You almost did," he murmured, voice faint. "But something kept me walking. I think it was you." She smiled through her tears. "You're terrible at resting. And you're terrible at giving up," he said. They both laughed, a fragile sound that seemed to wake the valley itself. The next few days blurred into quiet recovery. They built a small shelter from the wreckage, gathered food and tended to each other's wounds. The war raged somewhere beyond the hills, but here, by the river, the world had paused. At night, they lay beside the fire, fingers entwined. Clara looked at the stars and whispered, "When morning comes, I want to believe it'll bring something new." Miguel turned toward her. "Morning always comes. It's what we do with it that matters." She smiled, leaning in to kiss him softly. And for the first time in months, morning didn't feel like survival. It felt like beginning. The Chapter 10, While the World Falls Apart. Spring came slowly that year. The snow melted from the peaks, feeding the river until it ran clear again. Grass pushed through the ash. The air smelled of rain instead of smoke. Miguel's limp never fully disappeared, but he could walk without pain. Clara's laughter returned, softer but truer. Together they rebuilt what they could, not the world as it was, but a small corner of it that still belonged to them, a home of wood and stone near the riverbank, surrounded by wildflowers that grew where the bombs had fallen. Every morning Clara would wake to the sound of birds and whisper, "We made it." And every time Miguel would answer, "We're still making it." One afternoon, children from the nearby camp came running, shouting with excitement. The war, they said, had ended, an agreement signed. No more bombings, no more sirens. Miguel looked at Clara, disbelief in his eyes. "It's over," he whispered. She nodded, tears spilling freely. "Not over," she said, "but maybe we can start again." They walked to the edge of the river, the same place where their promises had begun, and stood in silence. The water shimmered like glass beneath the golden light. Miguel took her hand. "Do you remember what you told me that night? That we'd always be beneath the same sky?" She smiled. "I do." He looked upward. "Then maybe that's what love really is. Something that survives the distance between one heartbeat and the next, between destruction and dawn." Clara leaned against him, watching the horizon. The world was still broken, still scarred, but for the first time it was also quiet. And in that quiet they heard the faintest sound, laughter from the village, water over stones, the rustle of new leaves, life returning. Years later, when travelers passed through the valley, they spoke of the two people who had built a home by the river. A doctor and a woman who once walked through fire to find him. They said that on summer evenings, when the wind was still, you could hear their voices, soft, intertwined, promising the same thing again and again. Even while the world falls apart, love will always find a way to hold it together.